Welcome to Teaching Artist Podcast, a show dedicated to discussions of teaching art to kids, making art, and how those things overlap and feed each other. I'm Rebecca Potts, your host, a visual arts teaching artist.
Hi, wonderful people. I have a great episode ahead with Kelly Marshall, but first I want to thank you. Thank you so much for listening and making this podcast part of your day. It really means so much to me. I started this show as a way to highlight artists who teach young people, but also to help me feel less alone in pursuing both careers with passion. The community that is growing here is doing just that. I love connecting with you via email and Instagram, as well as at the monthly Art Educators Lounge meetings that I host with Victoria J. Fry of Visionary Art Collective. If you have not yet joined us, sign up for the next meeting. They're always the last Saturday of the month at 9 a.m. Pacific, 12 p.m. Eastern. We alternate between free community meetings, where we come together and share in community, and workshops with incredible guest facilitators. We also alternate between talking about being an artist and talking about being a teacher, and often places where those things kind of overlap. In March, we shared our studio spaces and ideas for studio organization, and it was so cool to see lots of your spaces. Last week, for our April meeting, Alicia Mernick offered a super helpful workshop on the identity mapping project that she does with students. Our May meeting is another community meeting where we are inviting artists to share your work through mini artist talks. We have a sign-up form you can submit if you would like to present, but we also welcome you to join us just as a viewer. You can come, offer feedback, or just observe and get to know some fellow artist educators. We would love to see you there. I'll drop the Artist Talk sign-up form in the show notes, but we'll also be sharing the Eventbrite link to come to the meeting closer to the date. So be sure you're on our email list or following along on Instagram at Teaching Artists Podcast to make sure you get that info. We also have our current spring exhibition titled Rise open at Play + Inspire Gallery. Folks, I am so proud of this show. The work touches on so many topics, from ecology to feminism to gentrification. If you haven't seen it yet, go check it out at playinspiregallery.com. And I wanted to let you know that next week I'll be taking a break and celebrating Mother's Day, so no new episode next week, but we will be back the following week. Okay, now on to our featured artist. In each episode, I'm sharing a bit about an artist and also sharing their work on the blog and on social media. Our featured artist this week is Alicia Quigley. Alicia is a 23-year-old Berlin-based artist from Ireland. Mainly working in large-scale format and dabbling in various mediums from acrylics and oils to spray paint and graphite, Alicia makes use of any material necessary to tell the story of each visual creation. This often leads to intricately layered textures and tones that bring a unique element to each and every piece. Alicia's art career began with her fascination with painting on recycled and used materials, such as old wooden cutoffs that she would collect from a local wood artist. The one-of-a-kind scrapes, scratches, tones, and dimensions in every piece would prompt an idea or subject matter, which she views as a continuation of the story that has already begun. From here, Alicia has taken part in various group exhibitions throughout North America, such as the Raw Natural Born Artists Showcase and the Pancakes and Booze exhibition in Vancouver, as well as multiple commissions including her participation in the Squamish Mural Festival in BC, Canada. Growing up as a ballet dancer, Alicia is particularly interested in the human figure, as well as the concept of the ballerina, appearing in her works as somewhat disassembled and abstracted, contradicting the expectation related to the classical subject itself. Using these deeply personal concepts to explore wider social ideologies, Alicia is highly influenced by contemporary street art, as well as classical expressionism to create a bold and unique finished visual. From her statement, she says, "Exploring themes of identity and transformation, I like to take strong, recognizable subjects and morph them into a form that is conflicting and contrary to expectation. The ideas of expectation versus reality and sincerity versus deception are ones that I believe are prevalent within our society and appear in multiple forms. Masked creatures, so recognizable yet somewhat not at all, symbolize the inner voice we hold within us and the identity we attempt to present to the world for the validation of those expecting. I often leave aspects of my work untold or allow for strong elements to lead to a place of nothingness and even dissatisfaction. This highlights the strength of imperfection and encourages the observer to continue the story. Using various mediums to create layers of tones and textures, the journey of each work remains raw and visible, retaining a sort of palimpsest. Every mark and stain is vital to the storytelling aspect of my art." And you can see more of her work on her website at aliciaquigley.com, or on Instagram, she's at nakedquig. And we will be linking to that and also sharing more of her work on our own Instagram and on our blog at teachingartistpodcast.com. If you would like to submit your work to be featured, you can do that at teachingartistpodcast.com/opportunities. I cannot wait to get to this interview with Kelly Marshall. She shared such helpful tips drawing on her experience as a special ed teacher. She also offered advice about starting her own business, her art school, Color Construct Create Studios. I loved hearing about how her work has evolved and the ideas behind her work. Her series of portraits of physician mothers during the pandemic is so moving and connects to a lot of her other work where she's talking about this invisible labor. What an incredible project to illuminate the collective purpose and sacrifices of these doctors. Kelly Marshall followed her BA in Applied Art and Design with a career as a special education art teacher, helping students of diverse abilities in the classroom and in her children's art studio, Color Construct Create Studios, which she owned and directed for 10 years. Marshall is in her second year of the Visual Studies MFA program at the Pacific Northwest College of Art. Her exhibition and publication history includes the Jen Tuff Gallery in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the Visionary Projects in New York, Shockboxx Project Gallery in Hermosa Beach, California, the Ashton Gallery in San Diego, California, the Artist Mother Podcast Juried Exhibition, Roaring Artist Gallery, Circle Arts Foundation, and the Art Center in Corvallis, Oregon. She lives with her family, runs a studio classroom, and paints from her studio at Art on 30th in San Diego's North Park. She is currently engaged in a collaboration with Physicians Moms Group to create a visual history of the role of women in medicine as it intersects with motherhood during the pandemic. All right, let's hear from Kelly.
I am speaking with Kelly Marshall today, and I am excited to hear more about your sort of journey and what you're doing now as well. But I like to start with that background. So could you kind of talk us through how you got into both art and teaching?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me today. So I've always been an artist. And I think the best anecdote to describe this is the story that my family loves to tell, where I was probably 14, 15 months old, was at my grandmother's house in the crib in my great-grandmother's bedroom. And apparently I had managed to reach through the bars of the crib, grab great-grandmother's purse, and take out her 3 Chanel lipsticks, bright red, of course, and painted my whole self, the fingers, the toes, the whole thing, the crib, every check in her checkbook, the credit cards, and apparently they came in and were horrified, then thought it was hilarious, and it's kind of been downhill ever since. But lots of stories like that. And my nickname when I was little was Busy, because I was always getting into stuff and making stuff. But I really didn't get the spark for fine art didn't happen until high school, when I had my first formal art class. And that's where I just knew. And I took as many of classes as my high school had to offer, and then I really wanted to go to a formal art school for college, but that wasn't in the cards for our family. I lived at home and had to help support my family in college. So I went to our local state school, San Diego State, but had a really great experience there. And it was a very practical program, not so theoretical, just a lot of really intense art making. But after graduating in 2000, I had to, really figure out what I was going to do with this art degree that my dad was in defense of my dad. He meant well, but he was not the biggest fan of the choice to be an art major in college, mostly because, what are the job prospects? What are you going to do with this degree? And so after graduating, I, had to figure out what to do. And after being an undergrad TA, teaching was the next logical step. So got the credentials, taught art for 5 minutes, lost funding, and then went and got my multiple subject and special ed credentials. So ended up teaching. I have been teaching special ed off and on for the last 20 years. So, and then about 10 years ago, went and opened a full inclusion children's art school called Color Construct Create Studios with one of my closest friends who's an occupational therapist. We've been teaching it's not art therapy, but it is a therapeutic art program for children of all abilities. And that's been a really incredible experience for me. And that is what led me back to my own art practice.
I love that.
Which really, I didn't fully commit to the art practice until sometime around 2016. And it's funny. My friends had said, "Oh, just wait till you hit your 40s. You're going to feel free." And it was right around then when I'm like, you know what? This has been missing in my life for a long time. So been rock and roll ever since. So that's kind of how I ended up here.
I love all of that. We will get into more of your own art, but I would love to hear more about your teaching, and just thinking, going from being an artist, being an art teacher very briefly, and then jumping into special ed and general ed. Did you continue to kind of weave art into your classes in any way?
It's interesting because I don't think I was doing a lot of it consciously, but teaching special ed is an act of constant creativity, because you have to try and reach learners who are, not learning in the traditional ways. And so there was a lot of, we would do art, I would infuse it here and there, but that particular part was really just more about creative engagement with my students and coming up with inventive ways to help them access math, language arts, reading, etc. So it was absolutely creative. Not as much art as I wish, but reflecting back on it, I was using the same part of my brain, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And then with the studio, Color Construct Create, that's definitely sort of marrying the two. I'm wondering if you have tips for art teachers, especially around, working with learners that learn in all different ways, or students that have different abilities.
For sure. Yeah. Yes. This it's something that I feel very passionate about. And it can be really intimidating, especially if I find that kids that have like behavior concerns or real impairments that hinder like their fine motor or something, it's hard. It's hard to know what to do. It's hard to know how to give them the access that they need and deserve. But what we found the most helpful is essentially to just work backwards. And when I say work backwards, what we would do is we'd figure out exactly what we wanted the kids to learn, what skill we wanted them to acquire, and come up with a project or an outcome, and then scale it, but think exactly, okay, if they have fine motor needs and I want them to, learn this particular drawing technique, do I need to use modified tools? Like, their special scissors, their pencil grips. Do I need to create a tracer in order for them to be independent? And the goal is to have the kids be as independent as possible. But you just find ways to get to that outcome just from thinking through all of the steps and where they might have a need. And the other big limitation, I think, that teachers don't necessarily anticipate until they're in the moment and finding things. We've all had those moments where you think you've got this great idea and then it sort of like falls apart. It's really limiting the downtime, the time in between, and the time that, the teacher spends talking at the students. If you can really pare that down as much as possible through structure and support, the fluidity of the lesson and the amount of interest and access almost always rises. So that's how we developed our program.
And then that makes so much sense. I feel like that's sort of that thinking is what led me towards TAB. And I'm still kind of on like a journey of figuring out this teaching for artistic behavior and moving towards more student choice. But yeah, trying to pare down the time I spent talking was a huge motivator. And, like, how can I structure my classroom and how can I structure my lessons so that the kids can, get all of the information and practice these skills without me spending even 10 minutes at the beginning of every class felt like too much. Like, how do I pare it down even more?
Are you familiar with Cassie Stevens?
Yeah, I actually interviewed her a while ago.
I adore her so much. And I went to a conference where she was a guest teacher. And the way that she structures her classroom was very inspiring for us in terms of just the way she uses call and response. We once, when we heard her, it was very early in our program and we heard that and it just was so transformative. The simple thing, okay, boys and girls, what's the first thing we do? We write our, and then the kids say name. They get in those habits and then it just helps make everything so seamless and fun. And then they're engaged. Yeah,
amazing. I would also love to hear more about how you structure the programs at Color Construct Create.
Basically, we have two levels of classes. We have a general art, and it's for any age. Most of our students are elementary, but we do have some older kids who find that structure, it works better for them. It's about a 45-minute class. We always use, an art principle and then a theme. And we try and have our themes relate to some form of text. So either literature or nonfiction, but because many of our students are on the autism spectrum, having that level of engagement with them, we have to have some sort of foundation to engage them and bring them into the concept. And we found that text is just essential to like building that interest, and then we go from there. So that's the first level of course that we offer. And then the second class is something called, well, we actually have three, but one is just an open studio where we'll put the materials out and let the kids come and play. But the other instructional course is one called Art Club, and our students are older elementary through middle and high school, and the kids help determine, in the beginning of the semester, we come up with a menu of options and ideas that the kids really want to explore. And we build our curriculum off of the things that the kids are interested in. And we will do short lessons, longer, 2-3 week long projects. But that class is really fun and interesting because the students really are driving the content. And the beauty of being a private program is, while we have ideas on what we would like the kids to take away from the program, we're not limited by a set of standards. We, as a public school teacher, I believe in that, and I want them to. I want to make sure that I'm using kind of a rubric or guideline for myself. But we have a lot of freedom, and it's really great. And we explore. The kids, they want to do everything. They want to sculpt, they want to collage, they want to draw, they want to paint. So we try and we sew, we do needle felting. We explore as many possible themes and materials as as the kids desire. And it's a really magical little program.
Amazing. Yeah. And have you been able to continue in person, or have you shifted to remote learning?
So when it's really tricky, and it's funny, I actually felt like a little bit, I had a crisis of conscience when I was looking through, what we would talk about today, because we've had to really pare down what we do. We went fully virtual in March, and that was okay. I mean, we pivoted, it worked for a while. And then in the fall, we'd had a real drop off in kids participating. And most of our kids that were fully included were really struggling with the screen time, because our school district is still fully virtual. And, having an extra hour after, 7-8 hours on a screen all day, the kids were really struggling. So our classes have been on hold. We still do contract work with, we go into some of the special day classes in our local school district and do their virtual art lessons. But our classes are currently on hold until we can reopen in person. That was the general consensus from our families.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And thinking just of sort of the business side of running a studio like this, I'd be curious to hear kind of how you got started. And then, you just talked about contracts with schools. How does that come about, especially for teachers listening that might be interested in starting something like this?
Yes, absolutely. It really wasn't as big of a challenge as we thought it would be. The first thing you need to do is develop an idea of what, we developed our idea of what we wanted to do. And we both knew, my business partner and I, we both knew that we wanted to offer art for kids of all abilities, and then develop just an idea of what our courses would look like, and then find a place to do the classes. Now, the tricky thing with us is, as in California, rents are so high. Having a physical space was just never, like a retail space, that was never in the cards for us, because we're both moms. We both, have other forms of employment as well as our art school. And it just, so that we ended up working out of my garage. That posed an interesting limitation, because then you're concerned about your own personal liability and what, if you have people coming into your home for a business, then that was interesting. But we ended up, talking to our insurance, getting as much protection as we could. And you have options. You can form an LLC, which adds protection. We didn't. And we debated a lot about forming a nonprofit, but that requires so much work on the back end. You have to have monthly meetings, you have to have board members.
Right.
And that being a nonprofit gives you access to discounted rates on school campuses or other, community facilities, which is lovely. But for us, we decided that our time was more valuable than paying the extra rent to lease space from schools. And we offer our classes out of we're still in my garage. But then for our summer camps and things that we do like that, we rent from the schools because of, if they don't have kids in session, then it's really great to have that extra space and sinks and being able to use those facilities is nice. But it's, and then the other interesting part of it is marketing. We found that word of mouth worked really, really well, and hosted a couple of free workshops, got some kids in the door, and really didn't have a problem filling our classes after that. So we just a limited advertising on social media through, moms groups and, friends passing the word around, and we're pretty solid. And then I have relationships with special education teachers in our local school district. And so they would, whenever they had a kiddo who was really interested in art, they'd send him our way, which was lovely.
Yeah. Yeah. That's incredible. Yeah. A few years ago, I was looking into doing some kind of summer camp, and the space was such a big issue. And you're right, here in California, it's so expensive. And thinking about that liability and like, where do you do this?
It can be a real limitation. And, and then it's tricky when it's in your home, but we've made it work. And I'm really lucky that I have an incredibly supportive family who, my children participate in the classes, and then they also, they don't mind if they have people coming and going. So, and we have lovely neighbors a lot of whom attend the classes as well. So it's worked out.
Yeah, I love that. That's so great. Through your classes, one thing I've been talking about a lot is just addressing sort of current issues, bringing in contemporary art, and kind of using our platform as educators to try in some way to dismantle systemic racism. Feels like a really big task. But I'm curious, like, just your thoughts about all of that and how you're how or whether you're bringing in contemporary art and sort of what you would think about that.
It's, we don't have those really hard discussions with our younger kids as much. I mean, it's always there, but in our art club class, oh my goodness, we have some really just meaty, juicy discussions. And the kids, it's, it gives me a lot of hope, my students, because they aren't afraid to challenge some of these things that need to be challenged and to have these discussions. And that's another really beautiful part of having an independently owned and operated program. Something I was always a little concerned, especially in special ed and working in a really litigious school district. You're always kind of second guessing what you say and who's going to interpret this one way or the other. But in our art program, the kids drove the conversation. They're not afraid to tackle hard issues, and they're not sometimes to a fault. They're not afraid to call each other out if someone says something that's insensitive or unkind. But we absolutely try and infuse contemporary art and social issues into our work. One of our favorite units that we've done is our Faith Ringgold unit. I mean, it's great because there are, she has her children's texts, and then you can just, as she's so multidisciplinary that it just lends itself to just really amazing project ideas and directions that the kids can go. We quilted with paper, we quilted with actual sewing. The kids, I mean, so much fun, and a really easy jumping off point to talk about some harder things with the kids.
Yeah. And especially thinking how you talked about how you bring in text. So having an artist that has text books that you can read to the kids.
Yes.
Yeah. And then do you have maybe any sort of favorite texts or favorite books that you would want to share?
So with our younger kids, there are some really great art books for kids. I love like Picasso meets Matisse. The kids love those. They're just, it's really great. It just gives them access. And then I am kind of obsessed with children's books. And even the older kids love them too. Like we love Arlo Needs Glasses. I think I'm looking at my bookshelf right across my studio right now, and it's Blue Dog. I think it's Blue Dog's Friend or something like that. There's so many. And then for teachers, the Art Lab books have great resources. The Art Lab, Clay Lab, that whole line just has really fun project ideas and jumping off points.
Yeah. And several of those are by Cassie Stevens, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I love her. She's amazing. She really is.
Yeah. So many great ideas. Yeah. And I love also just hearing how the discussions with students are really like a chance for them to take the lead and kind of dig into topics that they maybe don't get a chance to talk about elsewhere.
Right. I mean, we are so fortunate that the families and kids that come to our classes they're just really open and supportive, and the kids are thinking and engaging on these issues at a pretty high level, and it's across the board. And it's, I don't know, we feel really, really fortunate, and it gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, absolutely. And then with your own kids, I'm sure you have those discussions, but I loved hearing how they like join the classes and kind of interact in the school. Maybe if you could talk a little bit more about just balancing parenting with teaching, with running this program, all of it, and art making.
Oh goodness. I mean, we're all in it right now, aren't we? With, managing virtual learning and our own lives. It's a lot, but and I'm actually homeschooling my 10-year-old. He has some pretty significant medical issues, so he's going to be homeschooled indefinitely until we have a safe option for him. So that's been a whole new adventure. But with the program, so I have a 14-year-old and a 10-year-old, and my 14-year-old had when he was younger some pretty significant fine motor delays. And so partnering with an occupational therapist for this class, these classes that we offer, it was really therapeutic for him. And it's funny because he was always like, well, I don't really like art. I don't want to do that. But then he'd come and have a great time. But it was work and it was skill building for him. And then my younger son, who's 10, he just loved it. I mean, he would go to all the classes, and it would sometimes be at a point where we're like, okay, we're full today. You can go to the class tomorrow. But it was really beautiful for him because he is a natural caregiver, helper. I wouldn't be surprised if he became a teacher when he grows up. but he would just find someone who maybe needed help and support and sit by them and be their buddy. And it's really special to be able to include them in this process. And it's been, our whole family is involved in this. And, from my husband helping, prep materials on the weekends and things to the kids attending class. But it doesn't really feel like work.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I put a lot of my heart and soul into it, as does Kristen, my business partner, but it's really fun. So it doesn't feel like a drain on our family, and because the kids are involved, we all kind of win from it. So there are never enough hours in the day.
Right.
It's it's not something that is tough to manage. So we're really lucky. Although sometimes the business side, when it comes to like updating the website and, doing the taxes and things like that, that's the only part where we're like, okay, we got to figure out, we got to make the time, find the time. But otherwise it's really, really not that bad.
Yeah. And did you take a step back from your teaching, teaching in public schools when you started the program, or kind of how did you work that?
Well, we started it while I was on maternity leave. We started discussing it when I was pregnant with my second kiddo. And while on maternity leave, he was born with some serious health issues. And I ended up staying home for the first year and a half, a little longer than I had anticipated, in order to manage his medical needs.
Yeah.
And I'm way too busy and chaotic in my own brain to not have something else going. And so that's how this program came about. I ended up going back into the classroom part-time. I was a resource specialist. So I was able to work, 2-3 days a week, and then also scale that back just enough so I could do both well and still be present for the kiddos. And I was working, I've worked part-time in the school district off and on since then, up until March of 2020 when we went on lockdown. And since then I've been primarily focused on homeschooling, which is still teaching, but it's just a new chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that story brings up for me just this thought about maternity leave. And there's been a little sort of discussion right now on artist, parent, academic. I don't know if you follow. Yes. Lauren Frances Evans just had her second baby and was just talking about how, how do I set my out of office note saying I'm not here because I'm on maternity leave, but that's not a vacation. That's not Right. And especially, in your case, you're not only with a newborn and it sounds like at the time a 4-year-old,
yep.
You're helping handle these medical issues that must have included a range of emotions and just, I feel like when people hear, I had a year and a half off, no, it wasn't. No, that's not what it was.
No. I love that you brought this up, because it's something I think about in my art practice a lot too, is, the forms of invisible labor, that we as women, men too, there are a lot of things that just aren't acknowledged. That year and a half, oof, it was not easy. It really wasn't. And then, anytime you have a child that has significant medical or any sort of significant need, and even just a typical child, parenting is hard to begin with. But it was pretty next level in terms of stress and making sure that we were managing that while also being present for our 4-year-old. So it's all a blur. Like, oh.
Yeah, I can only imagine. I have just one 5-year-old, and that feels like a lot already.
Yeah, those were the younger years of the really like physical labor. And now that mine are older, now we're in the emotional labor.
Yeah, I feel like I'm at the point where it's a bit of both. It's like helping navigate like friendships and just learning how to be a social human while also still like occasionally wiping butts.
Oh my goodness, yes. But then also you have the added layer of trying to navigate all of these really crucial life skills in the midst of a global pandemic.
Right.
I mean, I really feel for these younger kids who are missing these important the social interactions that are so skill building.
Yeah. Yeah. And then that makes me think, how can we as educators who are also parents and like, we get it, how can we as educators help with that? I'm not sure it's a question we can easily answer, but yeah, putting that out there.
I agree. Yeah. I think it's the question for our time. And I'm curious to see what the long-term implications will be on, kids at their various ages. I see so many things happening with, like my 10-year-old isn't like my 14-year-old can interact with his friends on social media, or they Minecraft, but the younger ones, they don't have the same opportunities. So it'll be really interesting to see how we come out of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my 5-year-old recently figured out how to use FaceTime. So she had she didn't have a tablet or anything before the pandemic. And, we had to get her an iPad to do school. We tried with our laptops for a while, but the little like trackpad, and it just wasn't working.
Right.
That touch screen is essential for a 5-year-old. So yeah, now she does FaceTime with friends, and she's getting some of that. And then, we have like our neighbor, like the other people that live in our apartment building. There's a few families with kids that we do have in-person interaction with. So that's helpful.
That's great. It's funny. This leads me to think a little bit about digital art making. And as a very like a traditionalist and a very analog person, I really kind of put up a little like mental barrier with my teaching, but this has really caused thinking in ways, I find that kids, the older kids especially, would have these discussions with my students about, they'd want to use the technology and use the tools and take the shortcuts. And I would always like dig my heels in and say, no, you need to learn the foundations. You need to have this drawing, this, and this, before we can do that. And I think this has really created an opportunity to explore how to integrate both successfully. At least for me, that's the case.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, tying in more digital art making. Hey listeners, I'm jumping in here because I have an ask of you. If you are enjoying the show, I would so appreciate your support. I'm humbled and grateful for all the interest in this show over the past several months, and for the messages I've received letting me know that this podcast has resonated with you. It has been so inspiring to hear from you. Thank you. This podcast does take time, effort, and resources to share with you every week. And I plan to keep it going and stay focused on highlighting and inspiring artists who teach, while also continuing to grow this community and dreaming up additional ways to help you. One way to accomplish this is through direct listener support.
Your support would really help the show and community grow. So I've set up a link where you can quickly and easily support the show. The whole thing will take less than 60 seconds. It's at anchor.fm/teachingartistpodcast/support. You can contribute $1, $5, or $10 per month. If Teaching Artists Podcast is a part of your week and you love what we're doing, please consider visiting anchor.fm/teachingartistpodcast/support, or just clicking the link in the show notes and supporting us in any way that you can today.
You mentioned your own work and like how starting the studio sort of opened up a little bit for you and started maybe to push you towards making more of your work. Would you want to talk a little bit more about your work and kind of how like your journey there as an artist?
Absolutely. My students were the ones who really pushed me. They're like, Mrs. Marshall, where's your art? What are you doing? And I would just, throughout that entire time post art school to the present, I was making things here and there. It was always there, but it wasn't this really dedicated practice until I think I'd mentioned earlier in around 2016, I just was like, okay, it's time. I need to really do this. I really want this. I want to have this be a part of my life. And ever since then, it's been go, 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 go. And I've loved it. I studied painting and printmaking in school. And it's kind of ironic. I'm a total perfectionist, especially with school. And my intermediate painting class back in art school was a real challenge. And I wasn't used to not being quote unquote good at things. And so, it looked like I might be getting a B or a C. I dropped the class and switched to printmaking. And it's just, and now what do I do primarily? Oh, I paint. So, what I started painting and immediately knew that I needed to learn more and build that skill, and have been, educating myself and exploring and doing as much as I possibly can. And then more recently, I decided to finally pursue the dream I had as a younger person and go and get my MFA. And so I just finished my first year of a 2.5-year program at Pacific Northwest College of Art for an MFA in Visual Studies. And that's opened a ton of doors creatively for me, because I was primarily painting. Now if you look at like my Instagram or something like that, it looks a little chaotic. There's sculpture, there's video, there's all kinds of stuff happening, and I'm getting a lot more into conceptual art. So that's where I am now, and it's really exciting.
Yeah, that is so exciting, and I feel like grad school does that. Like it, at least for me, it definitely pushed me to be more conceptual, almost to a fault. Like I feel like it took me a little bit of time afterwards to kind of pull back some of the freedom that I had before that. Like I was almost too much in my head. Do you feel that at all with the program?
Oh my goodness. Yes. Yes. And sometimes it's crippling, because you're trying to figure out the visual language for all of it. And I mean, it's really great because I've really figured out what it is that I want to say with my work.
Yeah.
But executing it successfully and with like a common through line through all of these different mediums, it's a challenge. I mean, it's exciting, and I'm really lucky to be able to do it. But man, some days I feel like I'm like beating my head against a wall trying to figure it all out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a lot. And then to be doing that like alongside still running a studio, parenting, homeschooling, it's a lot to manage.
It is. But it's a really interesting time, like a really interesting time to make art. And I feel in a lot of ways that I'm really lucky to be able to do this program right now in this moment because of what's happening around us.
Yeah.
I mean, when I think about art history and, all of the work that came out of like times of hardship, I'm like, you know what? It's good. It is a lot. I'm not the most mentally organized person, but a really like aggressively like motivated person. So I don't have too much of a problem getting the work done. Maybe keeping it organized, yes, but getting everything done for everyone. I do a lot better when I'm busy. So it's been a nice distraction too amidst all of the chaos that has been 2020 and 2021.
Yeah. And then would you also want to talk a little bit more, just like take us into the concepts and the ideas behind your work? What are you grappling with?
So I mentioned before, I think a lot about like gendered invisible labor. And, my mother, she was this sort of like angry, repressed, I mean, not angry, but, repressed feminist who, a lot of opportunities passed her by because of her age and gender. And I didn't really understand when I was a child a lot of the things that she was frustrated about. And unfortunately, she was also a teacher. She passed away when I was a young woman and from cancer. And that was a really hard thing to go through, but it's a really good source for me to think about the lives of women, women's bodies, women's health, and access to care and what it means to be a caregiver. I'm working on how to bring that forward in my work. So, I'm still painting a lot, but my paintings are more like assemblage now, where I'm layering lots of textiles and papers and things into them that have different meanings. I'll use gauze and lace and things like that. And then I just recently had my first foray into video and performance, which was a little uncomfortable, but also really exciting. And so I started this inquiry into lace and its history and how it's used in women's bodies and like as an adornment and how it's shifted and what has gone into the manufacturing of it. And I made a little video, and I'm really excited that the video is actually going to be shown at an exhibition down on the San Diego Tijuana border in a show called Domestic Geographies. So that's very exciting.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I was just looking at your series called Lace. Are you including video there as well? Sort of like performance video?
Yes. So I've started doing these soft sculptures where I'm like, okay, what do I want to do? And it's my idea, the concept behind it was to have this lace over a body, and it sort of like leaves a ghost image, and it's not really very descript, and it's a little ambiguous, but it kind of like gives the viewer something to think about and wonder about without leading them too much into what it is. And in creating these sculptures, I started with like fabric mediums and resin and things. And what I landed on, which is pretty cool, is using salt as the form of hardening the sculptures. And I make an Epsom salt solution and then I will lay the lace over my body to figure out the form. And then I made a packing tape cast of my body to create a mold or a form to then soak the lace in the solution and lay it over, so then it hardens kind of to a crisp and it creates this ephemeral sculpture. And in doing that, and in like laying it over my own body, I started thinking about like that concept of like the invisible labor. And I thought, I'm going to make a video of this. And with some help from my studio assistants, my family, we were able to set up different cameras and angles. And that's how I entered into that, the video making, which is nothing I ever thought I would do, but it's exciting to experiment and try some new things.
Yeah. And I feel like there's certain ideas, certain concepts that just kind of ask you to be a video, if that makes sense.
Yes, for sure. And the beauty about making something as an art piece, as opposed to something that's, like commercial, is you don't necessarily have to be like highly technically proficient in that skill. You can, we're so lucky that right now I can go in and watch some YouTube videos and have my 14-year-old tutor me in the technology and kind of figure it out on a, it's not necessarily the highest quality, but I'm figuring it out, and it's really great that we can do that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like especially when it is more conceptual, when the concept leads, you can be more experimental with your materials and kind of be figuring out how technically do I make this work and get this idea out.
For sure. And like you said, when the concept leads, if you have a great concept, then kind of the other pieces fall into place.
Yeah. I feel like these lace pieces are so beautiful and moving. Just speaks to, like you were talking about, the visibility and invisibility, and even, touches on like loss and the absence of the body there.
Oh, thank you. Yes. All right. Well, with everything happening and, the pandemic and, like being like isolated, it's nice to know that those concepts are coming through. Cause, sometimes it feels like, we make this work and it's something of a vacuum, and that's great. I really appreciate that you can see that in them, because it's, working conceptually, it's not always easy, like figuring out how to get that message across.
Yeah, totally. I'm also liking how in your, like the work that's sort of more painterly, it's interesting to see where, bits of thread and lace come in and how it does all kind of tie together.
It's kind of a good story. When I was trying to get the studio space in my home ready, converted into a studio space / homeschool classroom, I had to pare down my materials and really get things organized. And I found this spool of lace in our studio supplies. And I really, really liked that spool of lace. And I'm like, how can I bring this into the work? And so, one of the first things I did is I'm like, I'm going to slap this on a painting. And then it just grew from there. And next thing you know, I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not just painting. Maybe I'm painting with the fabric. And then the fabric moved off the canvas and onto the ground. So it's kind of that through line that I've found pretty organically just after the discovery of this one spool of lace and my teaching materials, which for me feels pretty cool and like it's all, meant to be.
Yeah, amazing. And through the MFA program right now, I'm guessing like your studio is at your home. Would you normally have a studio at school if we weren't in this pandemic?
Yes. Well, so I'm in a low residency program, which is really great. I get to go up in the summers and do the 2 months up in Portland and use the beautiful studios and facilities there at my school. And then, work doing independent study with artist mentors in the quote unquote school year. So it's a pretty neat program, and it's great to have that flexibility, because we do, as a, not fresh out of undergrad, I have kids and work and all the things. So it's nice to be able to pursue that without giving up all of the other things that I, can't leave behind.
Yeah. And do you feel like most of the other students are also, they've already kind of established their lives? Is it similar because it's that low res program?
Yes, indeed. And
Yeah.
I love it. My cohort, most of my cohort mates are teachers.
Ah,
And
amazing.
it really is because, I mean, as you know, teachers are pretty good. Like we're good
Mhm.
people. So it's lovely. They're wonderful. And, we're all struggling with the same things while trying to make our work and, be there for our families, students, etc. So it's
Mhm.
it's nice to have that group of people, that commonality that we share.
Yeah, that's such a good connection right now too.
Definitely.
And I just was looking more at your website and seeing the pieces that maybe aren't as related to your other work, but the series you did of your sister-in-law.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that are so moving just to see, all of the gear. Maybe before I talk about it, do you want to talk a little bit about that work?
Oh, sure. So this is turned into like a much bigger project than I could have anticipated. So my
Yeah.
sister is a physician back in New York City,
Hmm.
and her partner is also a doctor there as well. And in March, April, when they were really in it back there, as we all remember,
Mm.
it was so hard. Like they couldn't even answer the phone. They were working like 100-hour work weeks. And
Mm.
it just, the fear, I mean, we were going through our garage looking for N95 masks, which I happen to have some for like painting and things like that, if I use spray
Right.
paint. And we were like shipping them back there and trying, collecting things for them. It was really scary. And my sister-in-law, as an ICU doctor, her experience was just so profound and honestly
Mm.
traumatic. And one
Mhm.
day she sent me a selfie and I was like, okay, I need more of that. Send me more. Can I paint you? And she was like, sure. And so
Mm.
I didn't have any canvas. It was, April. We weren't going to stores or anything yet. And so I slapped some paper down on my tables and I just whipped together these sketches. They were like
Mm.
painterly sketches of
Yeah.
her. And yeah, and they were done quickly. I didn't, sit and they were also done in acrylic. So it's not, like a perfect figurative rendering. I think they captured the urgency of
Mhm.
what they were experiencing and what it meant to be doing the work that they were doing at that time. And then something really cool happened. I did the critique groups with the Artist Mother Network and
Mhm.
met one of your previous guests, Katie Bradford Osborne,
Oh,
who
yes.
love her. And she, my critique group saw that work and were like, Kelly, you need to explore that. Those are really powerful. They're really
Mhm.
contemporary. And it's not finished. What else can you do? And Katie connected me with a doctor who runs an organization called Physician Moms Group.
Mm.
And her network has about 7,500 doctor moms around the world.
Mm.
And we decided to collaborate and do a bit like a large scale portrait project to
Mm.
create a visual history of what these women are experiencing right now as
Mm.
doctors and mothers during a pandemic. So the goal is I've got 90 plus 95 submissions. I'm going to attempt to paint them all. And we're
Wow.
going to collect their stories, their narratives, and hopefully
Mm.
publish an art book of the portraits and the stories.
Mm. Wow. Yeah, that will be beautiful and so just emotional.
Definitely. But sometimes I've felt pretty helpless,
Mhm.
during this pandemic, and it's been a really great way to feel like I'm doing something positive and,
Mhm.
giving a service of sorts to these women who are doing this work while, being, having the added layer of, worrying about their own families and, the work that has been required of, parents during this time. So it's a real privilege to be able to work with their stories and try and attempt this. And also it's been a real test of my painting abilities now that I've outed myself as a painting major dropout.
But I feel like the quality of them, like you talked about them almost as like painted sketches, like that they're looser, and especially how like the backgrounds as well are kind of looser.
Mm-hmm.
That, like you said, speaks to sort of the urgency, and I almost see it as like this sort of all these things swirling around these women as they're just trying to get through, and telling their stories is so powerful.
I really hope so. And I've had people question, well, why are you using selfies? Why are you painting them in the gear? And when I think about care and their experiences, I also think about what it means to have, as a doctor, as someone who is providing that, that really intimate level of care in someone's, in some cases, people's last moments of their lives. And yet they're given this barrier like on their physical self, and all you can see is their eyes. And that I feel like that's a really powerful thing to try and capture. And even just like the pain, like it, in some cases, the pain of wearing, an N95 over a surgical mask, or like in these goggles with then a face shield, and it's a lot. And I think it's a great challenge to try and show the humanity of the situation.
Yeah, I've seen, photos of doctors sharing photos of their faces when they take it all off, and just the marks that all of the gear leave behind, and the sores that it leaves. And,
it's really incredible. And, when I first started receiving the submissions, I would, I'd open my computer and I'd check and I'd look at the pictures, and then I'd read the narratives that they would submit. And even now I end up in tears just thinking about their experiences, because it's just like the sacrifices that they've made. You have women that are sleeping in the garage because they can't be around their children, or women who have infants that can't hold their babies, and or like having to be with someone when they're, as they are dying, as they're maybe their family, holding a phone up to a dying, human being because their family can't physically be present. It's just the weight of it is so much.
Yeah. And I feel like as a mother, that's hard, that adds another level to it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's why a friend was like, well, what about the dads? I'm like, I care about them too. And I care about everyone in this situation, and the ones who don't have parents. But considering the things that I think about in my art practice, the doctor, the physician moms, it just made so much sense.
Beautiful. Well, I would like to maybe hear more about your, I don't know what to call it, the business side, or kind of the nitty-gritty details of your art practice. We talked a bit about that with the studio that you run, but maybe if you could share how you're, showing your work, or attempting to show and sell, all of that sort of stuff.
It's a really good question. And I feel like as an emerging artist and someone who hasn't been doing it for very long, I've had a real evolution. And, when I started a few years ago, I was so motivated on selling. If I'm not selling, then I'm not valuable, and my work isn't valuable. And I've really taken a step away from that for the better, thank goodness. And by making work that is really about the things that I care about and my experiences, I have the freedom of not feeling that, I mean, it's not easy to sell work as an artist. Let's be honest. Like there are a lot of us and not a huge market unless you're like, one of the blue chips or something like that. But I found that when I started making work that is coming from my heart, I'm having a lot more success with selling. And I do that through, I used to have a studio and now I just am on a wall at a gallery studio space in San Diego. And then I also generate a lot of sales through word of mouth and friends, and then through Instagram. But the way I show it's so much of it is relationship based. And that was a really interesting revelation. I would do that when I first started out a few years ago. I do all the open calls and, they cost money. It's not easy to, and it takes a lot of work. You've got a format for every single call. They have a different set of parameters that they want you to follow through, and it just takes hours. Well, I started being really critical on which shows and which galleries really fit my content, my aesthetic, etc. And then have just a couple of galleries that I've developed relationships with. And so I've been able to show, there's a gallery in Hermosa Beach that I show with pretty regularly. And also one in Laguna Beach. And then I do the shows at the studio where I rent my wall space. So that's been great. And then, every once in a while, if it's, like a national juried exhibition, I'll apply, but I try to be pretty selective just because of, time and financial resources. And, it's usually a long shot and I'm okay with that. But every once in a while, someone says yes, and that's just the best feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally feel you on that juggling which open calls are, the right fit, which ones to apply to. And I love hearing that, building those relationships with galleries. I feel like it can feel sort of daunting and challenging to like get your foot in the door.
Yeah.
How did you start those relationships with the galleries that you work with?
It wasn't always very linear. The Hermosa Beach Gallery, it's called Shockboxx Project, and they're lovely. They're just a really wonderful organization. I started submitting to calls, got rejected from the first couple, but I knew I really liked their aesthetic and the artists who were, they're represented artists. And so I just kept applying, and they do really, really fun open calls, thematic open calls, and that lend themselves pretty well to my abstract work, as well as they have kind of a pop art feel too. And I got a painting in, and then made sure that, it's important you send that thank you email and you follow up and just and do it, from a place of authenticity, let them know how much it means to you, but not overly, syrupy, but, just do that little bit of extra work. And then the next open call, they remember your name. Or, and then they've seen your work, and then it builds from there. And, you send them the thank yous. It matters. And then that's been how I've done it. I'm not a very outgoing person. I'm not a person who really enjoys going to gallery openings or things like that. I can be pretty awkward in those big situations. So this has been a way around that for me.
Yeah, I feel you on that. It was hard for me before the pandemic to get to openings. Parenting gets in the way, teaching gets in the way. But then even when I do get there, I'm totally the same, like just this awkward person.
I can't just like go up and start selling myself as an artist and like have those conversations that don't feel really forced. And I've got to get over it, and I will. But it's rough. And also in San Diego, we're not as big, not as active as LA and New York.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an added barrier. And getting up to LA, it's 2 hours, but it could easily be 5 if you don't time it right.
Oh, okay. So a couple of just fun questions. One really broad. What are you curious about right now?
Oh, as a person who cares very deeply about humanity, I am curious to see how we'll come out of this time as a society, as a community. I really want and hope that we will be better, do better, care more, all of those things. So I'm anxious and excited to see and hopeful that the future may just be a little bit better. Yes.
Holding on to that hope. Okay, fun question. What is your favorite food?
It's a guilty pleasure, and this is my San Diego roots. I love a really good vegetarian burrito, and there's our local taco shop that we've been going to for I think since high school, and it's not too far from where my family lives now. And oh yes, a good veggie burrito, you can't beat it.
Yeah, and especially there in San Diego.
Yeah.
And then, is there anyone that you would want to thank or give a shout out to?
Oh, sure. I love my artist mother crit groups. They're amazing. And I've had some really great mentors. I'm working with just a really beautiful human being named Joyelle McSweeney right now. She's a poet. She's my mentor. And then I've also worked with Erin McCluskey Wheeler, who's a collage artist out of the Bay Area. And she's just been a godsend to me in terms of my art practice and helping me get into grad school. And of course, my family, who are just lovely and so supportive, and my grad school cohorts. And to you for giving me this opportunity. This has been so nice.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been so great to hear about your artwork and your teaching and all of the experience you have. I feel like it's really helpful just to hear the business side of all of the, the studio that you run, but also what you're doing and your long experience in special education, and how you bring that in to art making and to the studio.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, I really love it. I really do. And I hope that comes through.
Yeah, I think it does. Last thing, where can listeners connect with you online?
So I think with my art practice, it's probably mostly Instagram, and that's Kelly_Marshall_find_art. It's a little lengthy.
Yeah, but I'll link there too.
And then Kelly Marshall Fine Art is my website. And then I have more information about my teaching studio on Facebook. And it's just Color Construct Create Studio.
Awesome. Yeah. So I'll link to all of that in the show notes. You can go check it out. And thank you so much, Kelly. This was great.
Oh, thank you. This really is a special podcast that you have. I really love it.
Thank you so much for listening. As always, you can reach me at Teaching Artist Podcast on Instagram or teachingartistpodcast@gmail.com. Who do you want to hear from? Please share your recommendations of teaching artists. And if you loved this episode, please subscribe, leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow me. It really makes a big difference. Thank you.